And welcome back for another episode of the Providence Friarcast. It is January 13th. The year is 2025. Our first episode of the year after some scheduling and the holiday break and people being sick. It's good to be back. Joined, as always, here, right to left on my screen, Brendon Desrochers, Brian Reddy, who is rocking the chain briefly, and recapping here a 2-0 week for the Friars after not the best 2024 in November and December, but a little momentum building now. 2-0, big win against Butler, probably their most convincing win, I would say, in the league in a while. And a hard fought and entertaining game against Seton Hall last time out to get the win in what was a very high scoring game for both teams who don't normally score a ton of points. So 2-0, heading on the road now. Next game is tomorrow night, Tuesday, in Omaha against a Creighton team that returns Ryan Kalkbrenner for his 85th season and Stephen Ashworth for his 97th season, it seems like. And then following that, Friday night down in the Wells Fargo Center, Providence take on Villanova. So we'll talk about all that. We're also going to have our first edition of the Portal Committee, which is a channel we've created in the Discord that Brian has been, I think, pretty much the chairman of, updating his list of guys he's interested in the portal based on some things that he's identified in terms of mainly seems like shooting is something that the portal committee is interested in. So we'll get to some of that. Also, maybe spend a second on high school recruiting because there was an article today about a 2026 guy, and then Jalen Harrell had a tweet a little bit ago, so we can talk about that. Um, Maybe bringing some friends to Friartown. But I guess I'll toss it over to Brendon since you're next to me here. Your impressions of the 2-0 week, and where things stand now after a rocky start, but above water now in the league, heading into a little road trip here.
Well, I think so. Since Bryce Hopkins went down, we had the disappointing performance against St. Bonaventure, and then we had very strong performance, although they gave away the lead late against St. John's, lost by 2 on the buzzer beater. Then the disaster on New Year's Eve, which I think made everyone, for the second time this year, question everything after the Davidson game was the first one of those. And at basically that point, you're like, what? How can it get worse? And it didn't. They played really well against Connecticut, lost and blew a lead in that game too, but played well and played much differently. And then we saw that carry over to the home games against, let's be honest, 2 of the 3 worst teams in the Big East. Butler and Seton Hall, along with DePaul, are pretty clearly the worst teams in the Big East. Butler had played better earlier this season, and they also played Creighton fairly tough at home on Saturday. But they were no match for the Friars. I think the thing we've seen in these last 3 games, if we take the Connecticut loss as well, we've seen much better offense, much faster pace, and not very good defense. In particular, the second half against Connecticut and then the Seton Hall game. Seton Hall scores 85 points in 70 possessions, and this is a Seton Hall team that is 230th in the nation in offense. Adjusted offense. It was by far their best offensive performance of the season. Although, in fairness, their second best was the previous game against DePaul. So I think that what we're seeing is like a kind of a different scheme, a different style. One, shorten the bench to 6 players. You're starting 5 plus Benzie Joseph. Joseph had a huge game, career high against Seton Hall. Ryan Mila entering the starting lineup and a good ball mover and can go one-on-one. Same with Wesley Cardette. More time for Oswin at center. And then Corey Floyd has been much better the last few games as well, getting downhill and scoring and finishing inside. And Jaden Pierre, it's been solid, made some shots, had a better game, if I recall, against Butler than against Providence, than against Seton Hall. And so offensively, they seem to be playing more quickly, shooting fewer threes, getting downhill more in one-on-one drives. And especially with Ryan Mila and Wesley Cardette leading the way, and then secondarily Corey Floyd. On defense, what we're seeing, and started with the UConn game, is a lot more switching. They're switching at least 1 through 4, sometimes 1 through 5. We saw that ended up with like Eli Delorier guarding Isaiah Coleman, I think, at some point. and it hasn't really worked. But the offense playing so well, I think what Kim English is seeing is, maybe you don't have the defensive team to match up if we're going to go either small with Bensley and Pierre together, or Ryan Mila, as good as he's been and as opportunistic as he on defense and good defensive rebounding, and a one-on-one defender right now, he's not really there. And so he's Chelsea changed the scheme entirely. I'm hopeful that the team will get more used to playing a switching defense. It is a pretty big switch or change from what they did in the past. You see they're kind of a little bit hesitant and tentative on when to pass off, and sometimes overplaying it, and sometimes rotating too quickly, and sometimes being a step slow. Maybe that'll get cleaned up over time. But certainly the offense has been kind of incredible. And as I pass it off to Brian, I'll do with this stat. If you sort data, I know Gary Parrish likes to talk about sorting data for the Eye in College Hustle podcast, but if you sort data on barttorvik.com and you make it start the day after the Marquette debacle, so January 1st to today, Providence is adjusted ranking is 53rd, which is fine. It's not great. It's not terrible. Their adjusted offensive ranking is 7th. I know Kevin Farrar had a stat about like a 131 overall efficiency of the last 3 games. It's 130.4 if you adjust it for competition. But their defensive efficiency is 263rd. So compare that to last year, where it was kind of the reverse, or even at the beginning of the season, those first 5 games where it was reversed. Really, the team has changed immensely, in part because they're crashing the glass. They're making some threes. They're 42%, even while they're shooting a lot fewer over the last 3 games. So it's a interesting change. It's a big adjustment. So far it's been a good thing. I don't want to take away from these 2 games. There's good performances, and in the UConn game as well. But the last 2 were at home against 2 of the weaker clubs in the Big East, and certainly this week as they play solid middle of the pack, maybe even a little better depending on what you think of them, teams on the road, there'll be a stiffer challenge to see whether, 1, the offense can hold up, and 2, Brian, whether the defense can maybe be a little bit more efficient.
Excuse me, sorry. I think the most impressive thing to me was, we had talked about earlier, the last time we were on, that, sorry about that, guys. My Coach English hadn't seemed to be willing to make adjustments. And then he changed everything after the Marquette game. Now, I don't know whether it was out of necessity or whatever. I know a lot of people on social media think it was because he was watching the Friarcast where we discussed what he should be doing in terms of driving to the hoop more, mid-range game, etc. But I don't want to take all the credit. We'll give Kim his fair share of credit there. But no, seriously, they played a lot differently. You've seen, Wesley Cadet had his 2 best games against Connecticut and Butler. Corey Floyd has been taking the ball to the basket more. Rylan Mueller has been doing the same thing he's been doing all year, just more of it because he's getting more minutes. And the other thing that I noticed on the offense, and you mentioned about Jaden Pierre hit a lot of shots the first 2 games. Saturday, he didn't force anything. And I think I've seen at times where it's like if he hasn't gotten a shot in a while, he just feels like he has to look and throw up a shot. Saturday, Bensley Joseph was cooking. Ryan and Corey Floyd were taking the ball at a hole. Osman was just fantastic all over the place. And JP just kind of let everything happen. He just, was patient, made some nice passes. Was willing to let the team do what they needed to do. And I honestly believe that this week, those 3 games is the best stretch that Jaden's had since he's been in Friartown. So I was very pleased to that because we really need that going forward. Brendon mentioned the shortness of the rotation. Part of that is also the fact that they've had injuries. Kim English mentioned at the press conference there's a good chance we'll see Rich Barron and Chris DeSantico this week. So that'll get a little more. But quite frankly, I don't think they're going to be playing a ton of minutes. I think that the 6 core guys that he's been playing are working well together. And there's a lot of coordination, a lot of camaraderie, and they seem to have a better feel. One thing that, again, I don't want to get too much on the hype with Ryan Mila because he is a freshman. He does make his share of mistakes and everything. But the thing that impresses me more than anything is he has great anticipation for what his teammates are doing, not just him. There was a play, everyone looked at the Butler game when he threw the alley-oop and just chucked it up in the air, and Corey Floyd went up and got it and slammed it down. But there was also another play a few minutes later in that game where he was dribbling the ball up top, and he started to move in Corey Floyd's direction. And as soon as Corey saw the defender look toward Mila, he shot off to the basket, and he just threw this whip pass that was like something a veteran point guard does. And here's a guy who's played, a dozen games. Just highly anticipatory of him to see that, to look to his teammates. And I think it's a good sign going forward that he can handle, if not a true point guard, just help out with the ball handling. And the last thing I wanted to mention that I thought was good on the offense is whether it was Ryan, Wesley Cadet, and sometimes Corey Floyd, they're getting rebounds and just taking off with the ball. And that's letting other guys get open. You saw Bensley Joseph pop down, and he'd hit a three-pointer on a fast break several times. And I think part of that is because these guys took advantage of the situation. It wasn't just get the rebound and walk it up. It was get the rebound and go. And most times we've got 4 ball handlers on the court. So I thought that was a very good thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting on Mila because we've been talking both on this show and also on Discord and other places about, it's kind of figuring out why is Ryan Mila not playing. And I think because I know Brendon, particularly, one of the things you pointed out in the last probably 6 weeks or more is his defensive rebounding numbers just on its face. That was an issue that they were having, something that you might expect without Bryce Hopkins. He's a great defensive rebounder. And they were struggling, and obviously the St. John's game in particular was not a good offensive, giving up offensive rebound game, including the game-winning possession for St. John's. But it's interesting to see that while we were all kind of thinking, yeah, defensive rebounding would be really nice because he seems to be good at it, there's so many other things that he's bringing to the table that I'm not sure that I was really expecting at this point. Like to Brian's point, like his ability to have great feel. And this is all stuff that Kim had talked about in different points, like post-game things and other stuff. He was always, especially in the beginning of the year when Mila would get in a little bit and do something and someone would ask about him, Kim would always kind of gush about Mila and say that, just he's a dude, he's a dog, he knows how to play. He would always say these things, and when we would turn around and think, well, all right, well, why is he not playing? Why didn't he play against URI, really? Why there's just situations that, looking back now, is even more puzzling. But I think the overall is that it's been really positive. And while he's going to make some mistakes, I think so far his playmaking ability and defensive rebounding have outweighed any mistakes he's making, even on the defensive end. He's probably not going to hold up there over the long run of the rest of the season. But if he does enough, just like a guy like Jabri Abdurrahim, if he can come in and make some shots, that's what he's there for. As Rick Barnes said of Chaz Lanier, another Portal Committee favorite of last year, particularly our friend Adam, who really wanted him in Friartown. Chaz Lanier didn't shoot in a play that Rick Barnes called a play for him to shoot, and he didn't shoot. He benched him, and he joked after the game. He said, I put him on the bench because if he's not going to shoot, he's not going to play because that's what he's getting paid to do here. And when you listen to the clip, he was kind of joking. It wasn't as callous as it might sound on paper. But, you come in and these guys have roles, and the lessening of the rotation probably helps them be more defined in those roles. So even though you don't see like a guy like Jabri Abdurrahim, who has not played a ton of minutes here in the last stretch, he hasn't made a few shots. He's coming in, he's making some shots. He had a nice block the other night. So those sort of things, if you can get guys to do those sort of things and then have the buy-in. And one other thing before I pass it back off to Brendon that I wanted to mention from Kim's press conference the other night was he used the word shared purpose, and he talked a lot about we thought that maybe we could manufacture their shared purpose over the summer, but it turns out you really need to go through stuff, like really to form that real shared purpose. And he feels like there's a bit of a turning point. There's some speculation about the timing of that and maybe some news that was shared, which, it's all speculation at this point. But it does seem like the team has sort of flipped the switch, and they're playing both very differently in style and much more free, and allowing the players to play to their strengths as opposed to trying to work everyone into the flow of what Kim's offense is ideally supposed to do. And if he's maybe realizing that this is our team going forward, and we have to play to the strengths. And so maybe the adjustments are coming too late, but at least he's making them and letting the guys get downhill and do things that maybe were not happening in November and December.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Ryan Mila comes in, not a highly recruited player, although clearly the team liked him. Dennis Feldman identified him. Kim English really liked him. He had a back issue that kept him out of practice until October. Didn't play, I don't think, in the exhibition game against UMass. And so it's understandable in a sense that, not just health, but also the fact that his lack of health maybe stunted his potential growth and understanding the concepts and the offense and the defense, etc. So to that extent, understandable why this guy, who probably came in, most people, I thought he could be a 9th or 10th man, but probably had him even lower in the rotation, wouldn't get a ton of run, even though in the minutes he was getting, he was playing quite well. You also had Jabri and Rich Barron, who, though not similar players, were kind of playing in a similar position. And there's a lot of trust with Kim and Rich Barron because of the season he had last year, and he knew, the kid really well. And then with Jabri, like, he comes with a reputation as a guy that can knock down a shot. And he has experience, and he's tall. Obviously hasn't worked for Jabri, but it took time to recognize that, right? And then, when Ryan was starting to play better, his performance in the Bahamas, I think, drew some criticism from Kim, especially his defense. They come back from the Bahamas, and now Bryce Hopkins is back. And I think one of the things about Bryce Hopkins is that with Hopkins, Cardette, Mila, and Floyd, they're different types of players, but they kind of like to work in similar spaces a lot of times. Like, they like the ball, they like to drive, they like one-on-one drives, create mismatches. And then Mila and Hopkins are both good defensive rebounders. None of those four guys are great shooters, although Cardette's had quite a good shooting year. I don't want to denigrate that. He's more of a spot-up shooter. But Floyd and Mila and Hopkins are not great shooters. And so you can understand why, even as he's maybe slowly souring on Jabri, Coach English, he might see, well, Hopkins is doing a lot of the same things that Mila is doing, but he's bigger and stronger, more athletic and more experienced and better. And so that really hurt Mila's playing time against both BYU and then URI and then DePaul until Hopkins was injured and out again. And so even though I think it should have been possible to identify the things Mila was doing that maybe outweighed the fact that he wasn't quite fully there defensively, or you even see him in the game against Seton Hall, and he looked a little gimpy at times running around. He looked like maybe his back or other parts of his body weren't feeling so great. He still played quite well, but you can see like why a coach might look at that and say, "Oh, well, I have other options." And the last part about this, and I think this is something that hopefully Coach English has learned, is that he came here conceptually talking about playing 4 and 5 out and having shooting all over the floor, and I agree that shooting is important. It creates space, but I think at least the pieces he had together on the floor a lot this year, he sacrificed ball movement and player movement to get more shooters out there. He was a lot of Rich Barron and Jabri just standing around waiting for an open shot, whereas players like Ryan and Wesley especially, but also Corey Floyd, are quite good at moving with the ball in their hands and creating edges, and getting to the hole and creating things for other players. And when you had guys like Rich and Jabri out there, they just were just standing there. And then when they're not shooting that well, which neither of those guys have shot that well, then they're, I don't know, I wouldn't say functionally useless is strong, but they weren't very useful. Let's put it that way. The offense was not very good. And so I think hopefully he's learned through this that if that passing and movement is like another way of creating space. And you just don't need 4 knockdown shooters out there to create space. You can have a couple good shooters. Pierre, Joseph, and Cardette to an extent is a good shooter. and then other guys that can do other things, because passing kind of creates its own sort of space, along with Oswin creating kind of vertical space with his leaping ability.
You brought up a couple of points, Brenda, that you triggered my mind to remember. You mentioned Dennis Felton on recruiting Ryan Mealer, and a couple of these things I mentioned in my quick hits over the past week. But if people are at a PC game, you're sitting behind a Friar bench, it's a thrill just to watch Dennis Felton work during the game. You see assistant coaches, a lot of times they're yelling at the referees and doing, basically duplicating what Kim English is doing. The entire game, he's coaching and teaching his players. And you'll see something will happen and he'll point out to a play, something that's something they need to watch out for on the other side. Guys come off the court, he'll explain things to them. He's fully engaged in the game and his teammates. And it reminded me last year at the Marquette game when Anton Bonk was there visiting. And there was a play happened right before the half and involved the big man. And as soon as the players were running, off the court down the alley at halftime, he ran over to Anton Bonk and started pointing on the court, explaining to him that that's something that he's going to need to do next year. It was just a little thing. It doesn't mean a lot, but it really hit me the way he did that. And he does it all the time, teaching his players, keeping them on. And I mentioned again in the quick hits, at the end of the Seton Hall game, when there was a couple times the ball went out of bounds, Oswin had missed 2 free throws. They came down, Seton Hall scored, or the ball got knocked out of bounds. We were taking it out on the side. And all of a sudden, he just grabbed Wesley Cadet and started running him to the scorer's table. Kim was up right near there, and he's yelling to Kim at the same time to get Wesley in the game and get Oswin out so that we had the better free throw shooter in the game. And it was one of those things that, like I said, it didn't matter, and it turned out because he didn't get fouled, and we ended up winning. But it just showed that having somebody like that as an assistant coach with a young guy like Kim means so much. So I wanted to throw that out there for people who don't always know what the assistant coach is doing. Try and get to a game, and if you're at one, just try and watch him for a little while. It's fun to watch. The other point that I wanted to bring up that you mentioned was the difference with Bryce Hopkins and how it's affecting other players. If you look at the numbers for the season, the 3 games that Bryce played, for some reason, Corey got exiled. And like you said, maybe it's because they do some of the same things. I think he had 4 points in the 3 games or something. His minutes got cut way back. But if you take those 3 games out, he's averaging 10 points a game for the season. He's more productive than you realize. He's shooting nearly 50% from the field. The last 13 games, he's shooting 40% on limited attempts from 3. And he's hit, I think, 19 or 21 out of his last 23 free throws. He's really improving the rest of his game. And I think part of that is because he does have more room to operate. So, that's a good point that people don't see. Bryce Hopkins and Corey Floyd don't play the same position, but they do some of the things together. And I think that with Bryce not being able to play right now, it's given him and Wesley Cadet more room to take it to the basket and more room to do the things that they're good at doing.
And what you've seen from Floyd too, I've kind of isolated again on my friend Bart Torvik's website, just the stats from the last 3 games. Corey has 13 free throw attempts to only 15 field goal attempts. So he's taking almost as many free throws as field goals. He's made 85% of those. Cardet's 10 of 13. Corey's 11 of 13 during that stretch from the free throw line. And Cardet came into the season as a guy I thought he might still lead the team in free throws attempted and made, but he was a guy that lived the free throw line last year at Chicago State. And so I think that's just one thing that what we've seen from Corey. He still has not been a high usage guy with Bryce out, but he's playing more and he's taking more shots. And one other thing that I want to mention on Ryan Mila that I wanted to this is what I was looking at, like this breakdown. You can see, like, one, the offensive ratings are ridiculous. They've been so good offensively in the last 3 games. But the other thing you can see on here is the steals. So the Friars haven't forced hardly any turnovers the last 3 games. But one player who's been more opportunistic is Ryan Mila. He jumps passing lanes. And what he lacks maybe in the ability to stay in front of guys. I think he's pretty strong. Like, he's done pretty well in the post, actually, when they tried to, do a mouse in the house type of thing with a big guy. But it's maybe on the perimeter, he struggled a little bit with the movements and shifting guy to guy. but he can anticipate because of his feel for the game, get a couple steals in a game, turn one of them and maybe because of his passing into an easy bucket, or just take it himself and dunk like you saw against Seton Hall. And for a team that hardly forces any turnovers, having a guy that can do that, I think is an important factor that makes up for some of his other defensive shortcomings. You see his defensive rebounding rate there. That's the DR. It's like middle of the middle there, 37.3%. So for those who don't know, that means that like basically of every time the other team misses a shot, he's getting that ball 40% of the time, which is absurd, which would basically lead the nation if he could do that for the whole season. It's a knack. It's, kind of similar like Ryan Gomes, you felt like had that kind of knack for just getting defensive rebounds. I'm trying to see some other guys, Michael Smith, but Michael is a lot bigger than Ryan Mila. Ryan Gomes is a little bit bigger, certainly stronger, more physically developed, but some guys just have a feel for the ball in hands and positioning. And Ryan seems to have that, which is super important considering look at the sizes. We only have one guy over 6'6" in our top six.
Yeah, the other thing, and it's funny you mentioned that, and we've talked about all the things going on. We haven't mentioned Oswin yet, who has been playing out of his mind the last 3 games. I mean, I think he's got 11 block shots in the last 3 games. And what impressed me so much Saturday is he had 5 block shots, and I don't think he ever fell for a fake the entire game. He didn't get caught jumping off his feet and guys going around him or anything. I mean, he was just holding his position and timing it well and just getting in the way constantly. And again, if we're going to look at Mr. Pomeroy's numbers on his offensive rebounding percentage for the season, Oswin is 33rd in the country, and his block rate is 29th in the country. And that's, I think part of that is he's playing more, he's getting more confidence, and it's really elevating his game where I think, the first few games, it seemed like if you made a mistake, he got pulled, and I think he was very reticent to do things. And then, with Crease being down out of necessity, he was picking up the minutes. And, he's playing as good as, with all due respect, I know that Thomas Sorb is playing great for Georgetown, and Liam McNeely was probably one of the best freshmen in the country before he got hurt. But, I mean, he is playing like an elite freshman player these last few games, much more than his raw numbers show.
Yeah, I mean it's been fun, I have to say. The last couple games in particular, even that UConn game with no real expectations going into it. So I think maybe in the interest of time, we can start to look forward a little bit. Tomorrow night, Providence takes on Creighton at the CHI Health Center in Omaha. The tip is 8:30 Eastern on Fox Sports 1. Ken Pom currently has the game at 76-68 in favor of Creighton. This is a Creighton team that I think a lot of people will be familiar with some of their core pieces in point guard Stephen Ashworth, Ryan Kalkbrennan, who's back again. They also have some transfers, Pop Isaacs, who had been playing pretty well for them, injured and out for the year, but so that took them a little bit of time to sort of find their footing. Kalkbrenner, after having a ridiculous first game of the season where I think he had like 47 points or something, was not as good and had a weird stretch where he was banged up a little bit and not playing as well. But, Greg McDermott's got them playing pretty well. They're coming off a road win at Butler, which was a little bit tight, 80-76 on Saturday. They did lose to Marquette on New Year's Eve. On January 3rd in a road game as well. But they've held serve at home, beating Villanova and St. John's. They did lose to Georgetown in December 18th in their Big East opener, which some people, not me, but some people are saying was a golf course bet that Ed Cooley lost. Greg McDermott lost to Ed Cooley at some point this summer. But looking ahead to what I watched, just to kind of start off, and we can kind of dive into some of the numbers. I was watching Providence's game against Creighton in the Big East tournament quarterfinals from last March, and a couple things were striking. One was Devin Carter is pretty good at basketball, and it's a travesty that he didn't get a chance to play in the NCAA tournament so that all of America could see in college because he's already showing it with the Sacramento Kings. Just so entertaining to watch. He's everywhere making shots, and that sort of is to the discussion we were having before. Kind of noticing night and day. He's obviously was more of a shooter and playmaker than some of the players that Providence has right now. But it does seem like when watching that, it was kind of a good throwback to see that they did move so much more on offense off the ball. And Devin was able to create and do a lot of things himself and open things up that is so unique that is hard to replicate by anyone else. But it seems like in some ways they're getting back to what they had been doing last year, and without Bryce. And obviously Devin was able to make a ton of crazy shots, and he rebounded like a crazy person. But so that was something that stood out. But also, Creighton lost a lot. Baylor Shireman was really good. Trey Alexander, really good. Both guys have played some games in the NBA this past year. Shireman, I think right now with the Maine Red Claws in the Boston Celtics G League, and Trey Alexander's I think up with the big team with the Nuggets right now. He's played 12 games. I think I saw earlier today. So they did lose a lot. They brought in Pop Isaacs thinking that might be somebody who could be maybe an Alexander replacement in the guard spot, and he was scoring well, but then got hurt and is now out for the season. They have a couple other transfers, and I'll let Brendon kind of dive into some of the numbers, but that's just a quick overview of Creighton. But I feel like it was really interesting and good perspective to go and watch that game today, because that was a fun game, as I recall. And Corey Floyd, just as maybe something to look at, had a great game. Made 2 back-to-back threes. He was all over the place. Had made a tough one inside. I think he had 10 points. He also played well against Creighton in one of the other games last year. So maybe something to keep an eye on.
And Jaden Pierre also had 15 points, 7 assists, no turnovers that game. He was excellent. And we even got some big shots, 8 points from Rich Barron. Of course, the other player you didn't mention, is maybe the biggest change because of how he could help the team move the ball is Joshua Duro, right? So there were some discussions. Some people said, maybe even me at times, that thought that like Kreist had that kind of Joshua Duro starter kit, his passing ability and his potential shooting has obviously not worked out at all. But Kreist could be back. I think that with a guy like Ryan Kalkbrenner, you'll need more than one center, and Anton Bonk isn't really ready to play at this level. He's been thrust into the minutes just because of Kreist injury, and Eli was injured as well. We saw Eli come in and hit a couple threes on Saturday. I think he can provide some solid minutes. He at least won't. He's obviously shorter than Kalkbrenner, but he's not. At least he's not skinnier, much skinnier than Ryan, like he will be, like against most guys. The thing about Creighton that everyone probably should know by now, based on they play a similar way. They don't turn it over. They don't force turnovers. They don't foul. And they basically live with getting really good 2-pointers and then spreading the floor with 3-point shooters. And so Jackson McAndrews, a freshman that they have, who can knock down a 3. He was 4 of 7 in the game against Butler. Even Ryan Kalkbrenner was 3 of 5. He had 26 points, 9 rebounds, 6 blocks in that game. Stephen Ashworth has had some injuries, have been up and down this year, but he played all 40 minutes, only 1 of 8 on 3-pointers, but he still scored 22 points, 9 assists, 12 rebounds for the 6-foot point guard. So those are 3 names to know. If you look at the guys who have played recently since Pop Isaacs got hurt, Jemiah Neal is playing a ton of minutes as well, and he's been pretty solid. He's hit 38% of his threes over the last month since Isaacs got hurt. And he's passed the ball quite well too, which is something I didn't expect for the transfer from Arizona State. And then like those are their 4 guys. Like that's really their team. Fedor Zujic, who's is supposed to be like this amazing player from the German league. He first was not qualified or couldn't play. He's not eligible, and then he hasn't played that well. I found that. So Jemiah Neal has at least 3 assists in each of his last 12 games. Crazy. He had 9 assists against UNLV, 7 against St. John's. Creighton beat St. John's by 1 at home. So they're kind of a 4-man team. they haven't really replaced as much as flawed as Arthur Kaluma was. They haven't really replaced him. They're trying Jason Green. Mason Miller has been kind of a disaster this year. Like, you can think of him as kind of having a worse season than Jabri has had. And folks who are following, know that Jabri hasn't really had the season folks hoped he would have. Jason Green is like just a guy that kind of goes in there and fills in and can like get a putback, but he's not really a great rebounder for his size or position. And then Isaac Trout is a transfer from Virginia who redshirted at Virginia, and this is his second year at Creighton, and he's been fine. He can stretch the floor. He's kind of your stretch four, whereas Jason Green is more of your bruising four. And those are their guys. Just like Providence, they're not playing too many guys recently. Creighton has a 7-man rotation, and Mason Miller is kind of the weak link there. And the Friars have a 6-man rotation, unless, of course, Kreist and Jabri and Rich Barron get more action or play better. What do you think about how they match up with Creighton, Brian?
Excuse me again. It's I think one good thing you mentioned about Jaden Pierre. One of the things I think that'll help him tomorrow is Stephen Ashworth is as good a point guard as you're going to find around, but he's not a physical guard who's going to push Jaden around, which he's had trouble with in Big East play. I mean, when he went against whether it was Davon Smith or going
Stevie
against
Mitchell
Sebastian Thomas, even at URI, and everybody at Marquette. They kind of Davon Smith might be small, but he's very physical. Stephen Smith is more like a surgeon. He's very, he's very textured. He's very going around there. He just is a fundamentally sound player, but he's not one who's going to give Jaden a lot of trouble. So I think Jaden can have a big game tomorrow. Jackson McAndrew, I really like. It's funny. We mentioned Thomas Sorber and Liam McNeely and the two Friar guys, and Jackson McAndrew. It just shows that the freshman class this year is much better and much deeper than what we had last year. I mean, those 5 right there, just off the top, are all playing very good basketball and all contributing. I tend to think that Creighton had their wake-up call against Georgetown when they were embarrassed, similarly to what happened to us against Marquette. You have that bad loss. It's time to wake up, and you either go one way or the other. And they've been playing a lot better. You mentioned they beat Villanova, they beat St. John's. They were competitive with Marquette, so they're a tough team to match up with. I think the key would be, to be honest, is if Kreist can give us some minutes. You mentioned the game last year in the Big East. It's easy to forget that Josh Adoro fouled out at the end of that game, and Kim didn't want to go to Slim Castro. And at the end of the game, I think we were up 3, if I'm not mistaken. They had going for their last time down court, and he actually had Corey Floyd guarding Ryan Kalkbrenner, and they tried the high lob pass, and Corey knocked it away. I think Devin grabbed it, and that was the last gasp for Creighton. So it'd be nice to have somebody physically able to match up. I don't know how. My fear is that Austin's going to pick up a couple of quick fouls on Kalkbrenner, because he really struggled for a while, but the last couple of games you can see he's back to his old self. He's very fundamentally sound too. You don't realize, everyone talks about his height, but he just makes quick moves. He's got great footwork for a 7-footer, and that would be my biggest concern: is how does Osman match up against somebody like that, especially if Kreist isn't able to give us, say, 10 minutes. I think that could be our biggest weakness. But they're not a fast team. They're not a quick team. So maybe Wesley Cadet and Corey and Ryan Wheeler can attack the basket again. The only problem is you still then have Colkman you got to worry about at the other end.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because in terms of the metrics and the numbers, looking at Creighton and Villanova for the next 2, KenPom has the same score for both games. They're ranked, I think they're 1 spot apart in terms of their rating for the adjusted efficiency margin. But when you look at in some of the details, they are not the same in every single category. It's not just across the board the same. But Creighton presents some unique challenges for Providence in particular because of the 5 spot with Kalkbrenner. Villanova, on the other hand, I think there's probably a little more they have probably more consistent shooting. They also have Eric Dixon, so another guy who could present some problems and some foul issues potentially to go along to the point we were just talking about. So I think, and that game is Friday night. It is on Fox Sports 1 at 7 p.m. Eastern from the Wells Fargo Center. And, Villanova has sort of turned things around after, not a good year last year. They seem to be struggling figuring out the portal and how those guys fit in. And, is Jay Wright's old Villanova way going to be able to be replicated? Kyle Neptune seemed to be trying to play his style, which was not necessarily Jay Wright's style, and got back a little bit to the Jay Wright style, which made sense because a lot of those players played for Jay Wright. So now this also a personal losing streak here for Kim English. He has not beaten Kyle Neptune head-to-head back to their days in the Atlantic 10. So some stuff to prove on that front. And the numbers, again, are like the raw number at not the raw number, but the headline number for the adjusted efficiency margin is basically the same for both teams. And they both have good big men who score in different ways, but there are not exactly the same similarities in terms of even like shot share and other things. So I don't know, Brendan, on Villanova, if you have anything, I'll put some more stuff on the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at so if you go to Bartorovic, he has like an all-inclusive stat. I forget, it's called PRPG exclamation mark. I don't know what that means. It's mostly about offense, but the top two players in the country in this stat are Eric Dixon and Cam Jones. And so number one in the country on this stat is Eric Dixon. He has a massive usage of 34% in the last, I'm looking at the last month or so, basically since the conference season started. 34% usage, 20 made threes, 40%. He's taken 25 more 2-pointers than any teammate, 26 more 3-pointers than any teammate, and this is just in the last month. So it all runs through him, and he's also taken 9 more free throws, and he's 90% on free throws over the last month. So this all runs through Eric Dixon. I don't know what our strategy will be for him. It seems like a guy who's destined to get Oswin in foul trouble, and I don't know what you do if Oswin goes out. So I think that's a big concern. We might see some junk defenses. One of the worst performances Providence had all season last year was the one at Villanova. That was more of an offensive problem than a defensive problem, but it was still an ugly performance. Similar to Creighton, they have 3 other good players who are able to be super efficient because Dixon takes off so much of the load. Jordan Longino, who's been at Villanova forever, Ubiko Poplar, the transfer from Miami, and Jameer Brickus, who's another Big Five guy who transferred from LaSalle, I think. Yeah, LaSalle. And those are their guys. Tyler Perkins has really not played well since conference season started. He's transferred from Penn, another Big Five school, but he's probably their 5th guy. And Enoch Bokai is their center, who is kind of doing what like solid center, doesn't really shoot, kind of dunks, and that's about it type of thing. They're not getting a whole lot out of the freshman Chris Parker or Josiah Mosley, but they're playing and they're kind of efficient when they play. They just don't shoot very much. So I think if you look at the same thing you've put up before, where it was like since January 1st, who are the best teams? What's Providence's ranking? Villanova is actually first in the Big East. Yeah, they're 3-1 in that stretch. They obviously lost by 12 at St. John's. Their offense is 16th nationally. Their defense has not been quite as good. The defense was terrible to start the season. It's gotten a bit better, but it's still pretty poor. And they, like Creighton, don't turn the ball over. I mean, I don't know. I feel like strangely more confident about Creighton, about playing well against Creighton than Villanova. I just feel like Dixon's a really tough matchup. But, my goal is Providence is competitive in both games, wins one of them. That's certainly a tall task, but we're here to win games. We're not here to lose by 4 or 5. Certainly not here to lose by 20.
Yeah, I mean, again, you pretty much nailed it, especially with Eric Dixon, who, I have to be honest, he's one of my favorite Big East players that's not on a team except when we're playing him. It's amazing how he's developed his game. I think he's shooting just about 50% from 3 this year on like 6 or 7 attempts a game. His ball handling, I remember his freshman year, he was a redshirt originally. And then his freshman year, he looks very stiff. And now it's a totally different player. I don't know much about the NBA, but he seems like a guy who should fit there, even though he doesn't show up that high on draft boards, maybe because of his age. But he's been good. Jameer Brickus is somebody I didn't expect much of, like you said, coming from LaSalle, but he seems to know what he has to do. He doesn't try to do too much. He's a good passer. He knows how to wait for Dixon to get open, fire the ball, and pick up a quick assist that way. And again, they're another team that, they hit their, I talked about Providence and Creighton. They hit their low point when they lost to a very weak Virginia team, and Virginia, whose offense is terrible, ended up beating them, scoring 70 points. And that was kind of like their wake-up call. Since then, they're 9-3 in their losses out of St. John's, at Creighton, at St. John's, and a neutral site loss, 1-point loss to Maryland. All three of those teams are likely NCAA teams. They beat Connecticut. They beat Cincinnati, I believe it was. So, I mean, they've really turned it around. Just when most people, including I think the three of us, were ready to give up on the coach there, he's made a nice comeback for himself. So we'll see how that continues. I tend to agree with you. I'm not sure how we match up. The thing is, if Dixon's having an off night, I think they're very beatable. I mean, they are much more reliant on one player, whereas Creighton has two or three that can really go off at any game. So it's kind of a pick your poison thing, and you just have to hope that Eric Dixon doesn't have one of those 35, 40-point games that he's easily capable of.
Yeah, he had 18 the other night in that loss against St. John's at the Garden. So, I think that Providence would sign for 18 from Eric Dixon on Friday night. There's some opportunities here. It's 2 road games. It's in the Big East, so it's not ever easy. So, not taking anything for granted. I think that a 1-1 week here would be pretty good. 0-2, not great, obviously, especially with where we are in terms of the season. It's middle of January, and they're 9-8, so it's not like there's a lot of margin for error anymore. But I think you get 1-1, and if you can pick off the one tomorrow in Omaha and go for 2-0, that's obviously ideal. But I think you got to get one of these, and on paper right now, they're both pretty equal in terms of like which one would be, in terms of trying to pick one that's definitely going to be a Q1 or that's going to look better on your resume. These teams right now are pretty much exactly the same in every metric. So hard to really, decide whether one is quote better than the other, but you just got to win. So looking ahead, we'll do a quick. I didn't have a ton of time ahead of this to put together. Next time we do this, I'll have like a cute little graphic for us with the picture of the player and some of the stats, and we can talk through. But just to sort of get this on everyone's radar, it's the middle of January now, and while we're talking about games that are happening, the portal never sleeps. And so we've long had a portal channel back in the Slack, now in the Discord. So since the portal era began, I think the day that it happened, we started talking about it. So it's something that we kind of keep an eye on. Brian in particular has been watches a lot of college games across the board and has his eye on some guys. So I don't know, Brian, do you want me to just throw some names? Or do you want to talk about a few of these guys?
Yeah, well, what we did is, one of the things that kind of didn't seem to make sense last year in retrospect is, Kim identified the guys he wanted, went out there and got them, did it in very quick fashion. So it seems like, he wasn't getting a lot. He just kind of identified his guys, went and got them. But, for the style he wants to play, it requires to me that you have several high-level shooters. Jabri was okay. He's a decent shooter, not great. Bensley is hot and cold. Wesley wasn't a big shooter, more of a driver and scorer than a pure shooter. So looking at the portal for next year, we know we're going to have, right now we have 4 open scholarships. We have 4 seniors plus 2 extra scholarships and 2 freshmen coming in. So we know we've got 4 open scholarships minimum. I tried to look at guys. Basically, I wanted guys that have size that looks like it'll translate to the Big East. assuming that Jaden's coming back, as a 6'1" guard, we didn't want another one. So I started looking at guys who are at least 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and guys who were shooting at least 40% on 5 or 6 attempts a game. I think one of the things we found out with Crease is if you take a handful of shots during the course of the season, that might get skewed a little as to how good a shooter you are. So that was my strategy for looking at that. And I also tried to identify guys who are likely to be in the portal come the spring. We don't want to put Cooper Flag out there and say, hey, if he's available next year, we're going to grab him. We know it's not realistic. And one of the guys who's in our group, Kevin Jones, who is an alumnus of Marist, and we have one of his players that will be coming up on the list, also does a great job with identifying the recruits, tracking them. For anybody who's watching, if you're into doing a little bit more than just watching the games, but trying to figure out who we can get next year, who's around, when you hear a name, so they have a little background on him. For the few bucks a month it costs to join the paid version of the Discord, it's really worth it because there's a lot of information. And, most of us are doing this just because we love the Friars and we love college basketball. So it's the portal and the recruiting that we have in there. So fire at me some names. Or not.
So we have, you mentioned Josh Pasquarelli, the Marist person.
Yes. He's a 6'3" guard. He weighs about 190, I think. He's shooting 42% from 3. He's also a good ball handler. He can be, kind of that off emergency type point guard. I think he's shooting 41% from 3, or at least he was going into the other day. But he also gets a few assists. 44 now. See, yeah, he had a good game the other day. But he can do more than just stand there and shoot threes. None of the guys I picked, one of the things is if you're going down a level, trying to find guys who aren't just standstill shooters. Trying to find guys, Josh is clearly the best player on his Marist team. Marist is on a roll. They've been playing very well. And so much of it is that even though he's the focus of the other teams, because he can drive, he can pull the step back 3, he's a good passer, and he's a solid rebounder for a guard. So he's somebody who really fits what Kim is doing. The other thing I looked at, and all the guys here have more than 1 year of eligibility. We kind of got ourselves in a hole where we're replicating what happened last year because we ended up grabbing 4 guys out of the portal, 3 with seniors. So I'm trying to find guys with multiple years. Rather than have you just shout out the names, we want to just go through them.
If you want, I can always just give you 1 or 2 more, and we can.
All right.
Head to I was thinking before we get to one guy that's been talked about a ton, I think as a big guy potentially. I was interested in hearing more about Abdi Bashir.
Abdi Bashir is a twin, and his brother Abdul. Abdi is playing at Monmouth. His brother is in, I think it's Casper Community College in Casper, Wyoming. His brother Abdul is shooting. They're both shooting like 45% from 3. They're both 6'7", very lanky. But he's firing up shots. King Rice, actually, the game he went off on Seton Hall, I think he had either 7 or 8 threes. Said, I hope guys, opposing coaches, I know you're going after him. I know I'm going to lose him, but can you wait till after the season? So, he's that well known. And his brother Abdul is visiting Auburn, I believe, this weekend. So, he may be somebody who's going to get a lot of top offers, but just very quick, and he's got a quick release, and he can actually shoot from multiple angles, which is nice. The game against Seton Hall, if you watched it, they said, I forget whether he had 7 threes or whatever, but he hit from the corner, the wing, the top, all over the place all game, and he had a couple of nice drives through, a couple of nice passes. A very versatile player. The one other one I wanted to mention, just to get to one other shooter, is Bobby Durkin from Davidson. For those of you who don't remember, he played against us in the Bahamas, had 4 threes, 20 points, just really kind of took us to the woodshed, if you will. He does a little bit of everything. And the thing I like about him is he's 6'8" or 6'7" as a shooter. And he's actually, as teams are keying on him more, He's still shooting at a high level. He's played 16 games. In 8 of the 16, he's had at least 4 3-pointers made. And I think 4 more, he's had 3. So 12 of the 16 games, he's giving you at least 3 3-pointers. But lately, he's crashing the boards too. In the last 5 games, he's had a 9, a 10, and a 13 rebound game. Fordham really double-teamed him a lot. He was 1 of 6 from 3, but he had 15 points, 13 rebounds, and he's an 89% free throw shooter, which would be kind of nice to fit in with us. And I think he's averaging like 4 assists a game or 3 assists a game as well. Doesn't turn the ball over. Just the kind of guy that I think would fit what Kim is looking for. Kind of a quicker, more versatile Rich Barron.
Sticking with Davidson, the final guy I wanted to mention, because it's been a name that we've talked about a lot, and people seem to have different opinions generally, but kind of similar in that they're interested, is Reed Bailey, who put up 18 against Providence in the Bahamas and has scored 20 in his last 3 games, and is averaging, I think, 18 and change as a big guy from Harvard, Massachusetts.
Yeah, very nice guy. He doesn't take a lot of threes, but when he does, he hits them. He has range. He can, he's got that range to go to that 15-foot mark pretty consistently. He's a 75% free throw shooter. He's a decent rebounder, and he's a very good passing stretch 4 type player. I think he's averaging 3 or 4 assists a game as well. I don't know how he fits if we have Osman back with him. I think that's something that the coaching staff would have to figure out. But he's going to go somewhere next year. It's pretty much known that he's leaving there, and he's going to make himself some money. He is a junior, so he's only got 1 year left. Of all the players we named, if I could pick 1, if I could pick 2, I'd pick the Bashir twins. Hopefully you get one, you get the other. But if I could pick 1, I'd take Bobby Durkin from Davidson. I really love the way he plays, and I think he fits into Providence more than any player I've seen out there. He's good at driving. He's good at shooting threes. Great foul shooter. He's got the entire package for the game. And like I said, he doesn't turn the ball over. He's the kind of player that Kim needs, in my opinion. But we've got a list on our site. I think we have 25 or 30 players already listed, a few big men, a couple of point guards. As we get closer to it, you'll start to see guys, word gets out that they're coming out there. So it's something I think anybody who's interested should really follow.
Yeah, the recruiting stuff is great, and Kevin Jones keeps up on a lot of that stuff too, both with high school, and with the portal. And let me just, while we're transitioning to our final segment, which is again the most talked about on the internet, I think. Remember this guy? I wanted to throw this up there. This happened, I don't know, maybe 90 minutes ago. This is a tweet from Jalen Harrell, who is a commit in the class of 2025, coming to Providence next season. Just scored his 2,000th point, I think, last week. But he tweeted this and said Friars ? So he's pictured there in the middle. On the left is Amir Jenkins, who is a Worcester Academy point guard in the class of 2026, who is a rising recruiting star a little bit. His ranking is not quite there, but his interest is getting a little more than it had been. And then the real prize, and somebody who I think also has the potential to come back to 2025, which could be really interesting. On the right-hand side of the screen there is Sebastian Wilkins, who is a 2026 wing who plays at Brewster Academy, also a Mass Rivals player. So just, we're talking about the portal, but, recruiting never sleeps. High school, portal, whatever it is, it's always happening. So we've been kind of all over the map on Remember This Guy. We wanted to go a little bit further back than the 90s, 2000s run of the Friars. So I'll kind of give a high-level stats, and then Brian can take it over since it's now he's related to this person. It's admittedly a name I had never heard. Then again, I was not born when he played for the Friars. From 1982 to 1986, 88 games, 10 starts, nearly 1,400 minutes. Best season was his senior season with 8 points per game on 45% shooting, 28 minutes a game. And one of the other interesting tidbits in doing some research is that Billy Donovan and his wife, Christine Donovan, both were into Providence. Billy Donovan, class of 87. Christine was class of 86. They had the same major, but different classes, had some mutual friends, didn't know each other well. They met and exchanged information at this person's wedding to another Providence person. So a lot of Friar connections going on. So Brian, take it away.
It's funny. We were talking when we were playing St. John's about Rick Pitino and all that he's done. And, Billy Donovan is obviously the guy people think of, how he transformed him. But I also look at two other guys. One was Dave Kipfer, who was, useless. Not, I shouldn't say useless. That's rude. But who was not a major factor his first couple of years. And then the next year he got better. And then his senior year, he was averaging 10 and 7 a game in the Big East. And the other guy is Alan Roth, who probably went from less to a contributing role more than any player in the Pitino era. I wish he had Pitino. He had one more year. For people who don't understand, his sophomore year, he played in roughly half the games and scored 6 points, not per game. He scored 6 points in the season. The next year, I think he scored. Well, it's right here. He scored 29 points. So he scored 90 points in his first 3 years. His senior year, Rick Pitino loved the way he worked, changed his body. He made, he got leaner, he got stronger. He was only 6'5", and he was going against, the Big East. You remember what it was like in the mid 80s. He was banging with everybody. He averaged 5 rebounds, 8 points a game. He was an 85% free throw shooter. Scored 250 points in his senior year. He was a legitimate player, a legitimate Big East player in his senior year. After, like Billy Donovan, his first couple of years, you didn't think he belonged anywhere near major college basketball. I was thinking about it. It would be funny because if he played today, he never would have lasted 4 years. He would have either been brizzed or portaled on his own to drop down a level or two. But he worked it out. He was blessed that Rick Pitino came there. And like so many other Providence players, he fell in love with the state of Rhode Island. He's been in the area ever since. He and his former teammate, Donnie Brown, used to do refereeing for CYO basketball when I was coach. We used to see each other a lot. I hadn't seen him in 35 years until this summer when it turned out that his nephew married my niece. So we had that connection there, and I reminded him that his nephew got the better of that deal. Very nice kid that he is, but they benefited by marrying my niece. So he's still in the area, great guy, and somebody, like I said, if Rick Pitino had come a year earlier, he might have been an all Big East player by his senior year, the way he grew so much and was able to play at a high level in that Big East at 6'5", after doing nothing his first 3 years.
I do feel like there's this kind of no man's land for some of us between like your late 70s Gavitt teams and the Pitino years, where some of the guys just slipped through the cracks. Like, Otis Thorpe, obviously, but a lot of those guys, because the teams were kind of mediocre to bad in the early Big East, it's just nice to remember some guys and remember a guy that got better and kind of bridged that gap between the heyday of late Gavitt and Rick Pitino.
And is responsible for Billy Donovan marrying his wife. So even though they're both from Long Island, they didn't make it until Alan Roth's wedding. So that was Remember This Guy, and this was another episode of the Providence Friarcast. We had a little hiatus. We're hoping to be back weekly now. Next week is Martin Luther King Day, so I think I'm off. So maybe we will go do something even earlier than 9 p.m. But thanks
all
for
day podcast, 4 or 5 hours, just
a live watch day.
We did the live watch of all the games played that day. I think Villanova was playing Georgetown Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
But yeah, so we hope to be back every Monday now going forward, barring some other scheduling things. I know I actually just found out I have another trip planned for the week of Big East tournament, so that's unfortunate, and it's a Monday night event in Orlando. So that could be a bit of a problem. So we'll have to work around that. But that's 2 months away. So a lot of games to be played in between now and then. 2 games this week. Tomorrow night at Creighton. Friday night at Villanova. Thanks for joining us. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're live on Twitter X. We're live on Facebook. We're live on YouTube. Thanks for hanging in with us, and we will see you next week.
Have a good night, gentlemen.